let's dive a little deeper into the specific options, and we mentioned these previously. When it comes to managing our working capital, and believe me, organizations spend a significant amount of time looking at these, discussing these, looking at various actions, because it depends very much on the industry we're in and management choice. The conservative approach, the more traditional approach, is to have a large amount of working capital, to be more conservative, to take a position where we'd rather have excess working capital so we never have to default rather than any alternative. And this could be in organizations that have suffered from financial problems before, particularly cash flow. It could be because we're moving into an economic cycle like we saw back in 2008 that could cause us a very large problem in either collections or supply. The higher our working capital and current ratio, the less is our risk of default. So for organizations that truly commit themselves to always pay their obligations when due, without exception, they're generally going to tend to be more conservative for this reason. Even if that means we're giving up some lost opportunity because we're choosing to have a large amount of working capital, which of course ties up cash. And going back to clarify that point, when we talk about locking up or tying up cash permanently, we're not suggesting that we buy inventory and never sell it, or we make sales and never collect the receivables. We're talking about the levels of inventory and receivables and marketable securities. Most organizations, if we look at the balance sheet every day or every week or every month, we can calculate what the minimum level is of all of our working capital assets. Based on this, we could come up with a figure, let's say, of 100,000. If we always have a minimum of 100,000 in working capital, that's literally $100,000, pounds, yen, that is not available for any other use because it is invested in our working capital assets. And that's not a bad thing. But remember, that's 100,000 that cannot be ever freed up to be used for anything else. It's an investment in the business, no question. But it's a choice. Do we want to be very conservative and always be able to pay our obligations when due, and that's our course of business? Or, as an alternative, do we want to be more aggressive? And again, there's no right and wrong, good or bad. These are different business choices. And as the economic cycles change, as industries change, as products and services go through various life cycles, will probably change on a relative basis how aggressive or conservative we are. These two examples are just the extreme. If we want to be extremely aggressive, then we're going to try to minimize our working capital, reduce our current assets to just barely more than our current liabilities. Remembering that every day, every single one of those working capital components, both on the asset side and the liability side, are going to change. So this has to be monitored very carefully because we have obviously very little room for error. We'll have very little liquidity. It significantly increases the risk that on a given day or a given pay period, we won't have the ability to pay. We have to make that decision, not have it put upon us. If we're going to do this, it forces us to be more aggressive, not only in the overall decision, but in how we monitor our operations to make sure everything is working as we plan so that revenue is generated, costs are managed very precisely. On the financial side, we're going to look both internally and externally at all of the financial components very regularly. The smaller our working capital, the more aggressive we are, the more frequently we need to monitor our operations, our financial statements, and our bank accounts. In other words, the time we are not dedicating to being conservative and building up our working capital assets must be used to monitor all of our numbers, even if it means on a daily or multiple times a day basis, to make sure that the very narrow margin we have on working capital is adequate every time we need to make payments. Now, here's the good news. If we're very aggressive, if we're monitoring our operations, our financials, and our banking relationships and accounts very aggressively daily, we probably can comfortably operate with a very aggressive position, very minimal working capital. Now let's compare that to the previous example. On the conservative side, if our working capital was 100,000, maybe if we're very aggressive, we could get it down to 10,000. That means every day, the difference between our current assets and our current liabilities is much smaller. But if it truly is, then our current assets probably are dramatically less, which means we have less cash on an ongoing basis invested in them. That would free up that cash to be used in other ways, to pay down obligations, to invest in projects. Your choice. Be conservative on working capital, reduces the risk. Be aggressive on working capital, which frees up cash flow. Which is going to work for you? The extreme version of the aggressive position is what is referred to as zero working capital. And this is not a new concept or not a bizarre off-the-cuff item. There actually is a global movement to move towards working capital that is zero. Zero working capital, being as aggressive as we possibly can be, is what an increasing number of organizations around the world are attempting to do. Is it risky? Absolutely. Can we do it more comfortably today than in the past? Most definitely. And again, the reasons are for exactly what we said in the previous slide. We have the ability today, with real-time, online, integrated operating, financial, and banking software, to be able to monitor our accounts multiple times a day. As long as we do this, as long as we set our goal at zero working capital and manage the working capital assets on a daily basis, we can get as close as possible to matching our current assets with our current liabilities. If that's what we choose to do, and we dedicate the resources to both understand and monitor and adjust our working capital assets, in today's world, this is doable, but it must be done properly.